During the past few sections, we have been working with one project and one project only, our expenses application. Now, for this section, I have created a brand new project. Now, full disclaimer here before going deeper into things, I am just consuming an RSS service, so of course you can have access to it. I'm going to give you the URL, but you can use any other RSS service that you want. Another disclaimer in here, this one is in Spanish, but I think the content is not important in this case. So basically, I am just listing a bunch of items. I'm going to explain to you exactly what I did here in just a second. But basically, I am just listing them, and when I select one, I go to a detail page that is basically just loading a web page. So there is really nothing new going on in here. Let me go ahead and start with the VM. As you can see in my project, I do have my model, my view, and my view model folders. In this case, by the way, instead of the view, I have added one behavior. It's actually going to be identical to the one that we created in the previous section. Now, so actually let me start with the posts, which is the model. This is simply the model of my RSS. So I have the main object in here. This is of course XML, so I will have to use these XML roots to define the types, the name of the RSS root, and the name of the elements. The code is of course as always available in this lecture here on Udemy or on GitHub. And you can always just use this code that I'm using right here, but if you have your own RSS service that you want to use, you would have to have the correct XML roots with the correct element names, as well as the XML elements. So basically, this is just the model of that RSS. Now, I am doing something weird in here because the pub date, which is the date when this was published, is actually a string. So I am just getting that string as an actual date time in here by making a parse from the specific format that the publication date has. So again, nothing fancy in here. You can just copy this code if you want to use the same RSS service. And over here in the view model, I am defining a property of that type. I do have the iNotify property changed implemented, although I am not using it right now. The main VM is simply in a constructor reading the RSS. Here is the method that does that. And it simply goes and creates the XML serializer, makes the request to the internet to get this RSS, this XML file. So this one is the one that you can use if you want to use the same one that I'm using. If not, of course, here you would change to the URL for your service. Simply read the XML bytes and deserialize them as the posts type, which is the model that I just showed you, and assign it to the blog. Now, because the blog actually has an observable collection, that is why I'm not currently using the iNotify property changed, because that observable collection will change. And that observable collection is the one that is set as the item source for one particular list view. Now, before going deep into this list view, in the app.saml, I have created a couple of resources. Hopefully this is nothing new to you. I'm simply defining a couple of colors, so if eventually I want to change them, it's easy to do that. And so the list view. The list view is simply getting that data context to that VM. So as always, I have defined the VM in here, I have a resource in here, and that one is set as the binding context. And the VM has the blog property that we just saw. And inside of that property, if we go to the model, notice that the blog itself, or the posts, the first element, has a channel, which is what I'm accessing in here. And the channel, which is this, has an observable collection of items. That is what I'm binding to the item source. And so I have, by the way, a behavior in here that I'll get to in just a second. The item template. The item template is a bit interesting because this is actually a view cell that has a frame. Now this frame actually allows me to set a corner radius, so it's not entirely rectangular. It has some rounded corners, so this frame helps me do that, and it's also going to add a small shadow in there. And basically I just have a stack layout with an image that is binding to the enclosure.url. So of course, each and every one of these view cells is going to contain an element from the observable collection, which is an item. And the item has this enclosure, and the enclosure has this URL. This URL is actually the image, and that's why I'm binding it right here. And there is also a title in the item, and there is also a creator, so who created this, and that is what I'm binding there. So it's simply a string. And this is the list view. For the list view, I am using a couple of styles for these labels, and that is why I have a couple of styles over here, just setting how those labels are going to look like. And by the way, here on the main page.xaml.cs, I am setting this set use save area, which is important for iPhone 10 and iPhone XS. I will show you why in just a second. But I'm just setting use save area value to true in here. So I can do that by xamarin.forms platform configuration iOS specific. This is iOS specific .page and set use save area to true. Then the list view behavior, like I said, it's going to be the exact same thing that we coded in the previous section. We're simply going to be creating an item selected event handler. So when one of the items is selected, we are going to be navigating, in this case, to the post page and passing the selected item. So the post page is actually going to be doing the same thing that I showed you, setting use save area to true. It also has an overridden constructor that is receiving that item, and it's simply going to set the web view source to the item link that comes from that item. So if we go to the model, you see that the item has an item link with the actual link to the post. And so in the SAML, I'm simply defining a web view, and in here I'm not doing any MVVM of the source. I just set the name of the web view, and I set it directly from the code behind. So let me quickly explain what this set use save area does. And so for that, let me just run my application. Notice that down here, there is this small white space reserved for, of course, because in the iPhone 10, 10s, and X Max, there's no home button. You do this to return to home or to open the app switcher. That space, normally you don't want any content below it. Of course, even if there is content below it, you can do this. There's no way to block it. But this is what use save area does. It just doesn't display anything in there. If I don't set the use save area to true, the content would be behind this small section. Maybe there are some scenarios where you want to do that. I normally don't. It doesn't feel right, but you can see what that small line of code does. So this is what I wanted to show you before moving forward. I am going to have this code that, of course, you can download immediately, so you can start working immediately in the next lecture with GitHub. So during the rest of the section, we continue to implement what the section is about. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time talking about this code. And by the way, I don't have anything on Android or iOS. This is entirely shared. But I didn't want to spend a lot of time building the application because everything that I just showed you, we have already done before. What I do want to show you in this section is how to use GitHub and App Center to be able to distribute your applications, and not just that, but be able to know a little bit more about how your users are using your application. Starting in the next lecture then, we're going to learn how to set up this project over on GitHub.